Rob is an incredible guy, a great musician, super interactive, super open-minded, very positive. I don't think I've ever heard Rob say a negative thing about anyone, to tell you the truth. And I've known Rob for 30 years.
Every time we play, we don't have to think about it, which is kind of what you want with a bass player and a drummer, you know, where you can just kind of show up and just play together and it just feels great and the vibe is through the roof and it's good and that's all you can really ask for. So I love Rob. He's a great guy.
Yeah, Rob is a phenomenal bass player, someone I've looked up to since I was like, you know, a pipsqueak in jazz and had no idea what I was doing, and he was already like a very accomplished like musician and was playing at a super high level. So I've always been trying to get to the point where I can play with a musician of his caliber.
He's so super hip. He's been streaming, and I love it because he does it from his phone. And I'm like, dude, hell yeah, Rob, that's tight. Like, that's what I'm over here rolling up cables. I got 5 cameras. It's stupid. Like, just do it on your phone. And what am I doing?
Can you tell me your first memories of music in your life?
Absolutely, I can. My mom was very musical, and she played classical guitar and recorder, and was just very supportive and involved in music. So my earliest memories are when we lived in a little house on Fern Glen Street in La Jolla. It was my grandfather's house, and I remember her like getting a guitar and then me taking lessons. So I started, you know, she just was very supportive of music. So I pretty much right away, I didn't play guitar at first, I played ukulele, and then after I got a little bit bigger, I got into guitar. And it was actually what's called a baritone ukulele, which is like the low 4 strings of a guitar. So you're actually starting to learn guitar, but I was just too little for guitar.
What is your mom's background in terms of classical guitar? Did she have a degree? Did she do it casually?
No, she just did it casually. She was definitely into the arts, and she was big on spinning and weaving. She traveled like all over Peru studying spinning and weaving, but she just loved music. She played in these recorder ensembles. There was a woman named Marge Kofler that taught out at, she was head of the department out at SDSU. And my mom played in some of her recorder ensembles, and so did I. That was later when I was like 11 or 12, but earlier on, my mom just always had a thing for music, and so she was just supportive, which was really nice. And my dad was kind of, you know, he didn't have much music in his life, but he wasn't against it. I mean, I don't think either of them thought it was maybe a legit long-term, you know, way to make a living. But my mom was certainly supportive of that way, and I have other members of my family, like past history, that were very established, like good musicians.
What is a recorder ensemble?
Oh, so recorders are those little things that are, you know, just like you kind of make jokes about them, but they're actually a serious, like, beautiful instrument. So a recorder ensemble will have, there's a bass recorder that's a big thing. It almost looks like a bassoon, and it has a neck piece like this, and it's about 3.5 inches in diameter, and that's actually what I played later on. I played bass recorder, and then you have tenor and alto and soprano and even sopranino sometimes. So generally it would be like, I use the term ensemble, but generally it's 4 or 5 people, and there'll be a first alto, there'll be like 2 alto parts and stuff, so it gets all the cool harmony. So yeah, that's what it is, and you just meet and make music, and it's cool. I mean, they're really quiet little instruments, especially the bass recorder, so you're not going to be like having the neighbors yell at you and turn that down, you know.
Were you a competitive musician when you were young, or were you more just the love of the art?
You know, no, I was never competitive at all. In fact, I didn't feel very good. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I never felt all that good about my musical talent or my level of musicianship. Although I had an interesting transition. You know, after guitar, I started playing flute when I got to middle school. I guess I was 11 or 12, and flute was kind of like a drag for me. I don't know exactly why I chose it, but I was like I was already like 6 feet tall, this tall, lanky kid with pimples, and just playing flute, and me and this guy John Stevens were the last two chairs. There was like 12 flute players, and of course they're all the girls, and they're just like woo, and we were like the last two chairs, and it was just like really not a cool scene for me, or John Stevens, I'm sure. And then I switched to sax after like a year and a half, and as soon as I switched to sax, I took a couple lessons, and I started practicing, and I felt really good. Like I moved up, I was like second chair alto or something, so immediately my confidence kind of felt better. But I never felt like competitive. I just felt sort of a love for music. I liked it, and it was one of the things that I felt like I had a little bit of a natural affinity for.
What really about music grabbed your heart and soul?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the effect it had on people. Immediately I realized it was kind of a sense of community, that people dug it. And I say the same thing now when I go into schools, but you can be having a pretty crummy day and you hear a band live or even a tune on the radio, and you're just totally transformed, and it has that immediate effect, and there's almost no negative aspects of music, you know what I mean, unless you live next to an apartment with a drummer or something in it. I mean, that's a joke, but sorry. Sometimes music could be like, oh my gosh, but I like that about it a lot, and I like the creative aspect of it. I like the fact that everybody has their own voice, even if you're not as talented. A student might come in, they've only played 6 months or something, and I say, well, play this little melody, play Happy Birthday or something, and their take on it is cool, because as long as they kind of know the notes, they're expressing themselves, and I like that a lot. So that's for me kind of what I dig about music.
Did you have any issues going from I guess a string instrument to a wind instrument and eventually a string instrument again?
Yeah, it didn't. Of course, you kind of have to relearn things. I remember saxophone, I really dug it because it seemed pretty easy. After, you had to get your embouchure, but flute always just kind of seemed like a lot of work to get a decent sound. And saxophone, although I'm sure my sound wasn't very good, but just you could get a sound and it sounded pretty cool, and I could, I started trying to play along with things. Like I remember there was I think a sax solo in some Loggins and Messina song, Your Mama Don't Dance or something, and I used to try to play along with the sax solo, and just learn things by ear, some Chicago songs, and just the ability to kind of grab it. And I like the tone of the saxophone.
As a kid, who were your biggest music influences?
Well, I mean, if you're really talking about when I was a kid, like early on, I mean, I was into the Monkees and then the Beatles. And I did get some exposure to jazz early on. That was through my mom again. She had like some Dave Brubeck albums and Cannonball Adderley. So I checked out some people like that. But I think I was more like 12 or 13 when I kind of got more into jazz. But I always had a thing for rock. Like I always loved like Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin, and I still do. I mean, to this day, I can listen to any of their stuff, and it's magical. But the jazz thing definitely like kind of caught hold in my teens, and I was, even though I couldn't improvise very well, but I kind of got started, and I was in this Optimus marching band, and they had like a stage or a little jazz ensemble, and I got in that and got some experience. I kind of cringe when I think back to some of my solos and my approaches to how to solo, but I still, just that you get up there and stand up there and play really takes some balls, and you're like, oh my God, but just that you go for it. It's a great thing. It builds your confidence, I think.
What middle school and high school did you go to?
I went to La Jolla Elementary, then I went to La Jolla, Muirlands Middle School, and my instructor there was a guy named Don Artemis, who is a totally great, I don't even know what Don's instrument was. I think it might have been trombone, but he was a great teacher. He really motivated me. And I remember he was really into off-road. He had a Ford Bronco, and he used to off-road, and he'd give us we could get him started on these tangents talking about off-roading, and he would just love it. And but he was a great teacher. And then when I went to La Jolla High School, Mike Smith was teaching, and Mike, I still see Mike, and he was a great teacher. Mike really had a great music program going on, and so did Don. So I was super lucky that they had functioning like programs. You know, that was kind of back in the day when schools were funded for music and arts a lot more than now.
Looking back, was there ever a time that you felt like giving up? And not just in music, but just kind of like you were overcome, a personal obstacle that really bogged you down, whether it was health related or social related or just academic related?
Yeah, I would say probably, I mean, I'm kind of like the tortoise and the hare. I'm not the hare, I'm the tortoise, where I kind of just keep slogging away on things. But I think my lack of confidence was probably my biggest detriment, which I see the same things in students. It's like you get students that just go for it and they just don't care what it sounds like. And I'm just like, oh, I want to hug you. I'm just like, yes, that's it. And other people are like, oh, wrong note, stop, you know, and I'm sorry and all that. And I kind of used to be like that, and it just doesn't serve you very well in music or in just life, really, in life, for like getting, you know, social connections and everything. So I would say if there was any detriment, I didn't really have any issues. I had support from people, you know, or at least my parents. I mean, I never felt that good about my playing, although I enjoyed it. But I think a lack of confidence, but you know, teenagers go through all sorts of stuff, and even into my 20s and 30s, although I kind of hit it, I think. And I think even now, like a lot, I don't have much lack of confidence now, but I mean, I see some of my peers, I feel like, even though they don't talk about it, I feel like they're not that secure. And at a certain point, I was just like, screw it, this is like, I am who I am. And you know, I look at musicians that have made it big, and whatever your terminology for big is, you know, but successful musicians. And you know, like you take Ray Charles or Willie Nelson, or you know, I mean, some people really have like funky qualities to them, and it's not like Barbra Streisand perfect, but it's so emotive, and that's really what it's all about. So whether you're an instrumentalist or a vocalist, I think just expressing yourself as sincerely as you can is like the ticket, you know. And you have to be confident to do that, you know. If you start thinking like somebody's not going to like that, or you know, you just have to believe in yourself, you know, no matter what.
Do you have any meditative or outdoors or anything like that, any activities that you do that really helps just kind of get your mind off of the real world and get your mind off of that? Yeah,
well, I mean, the music obviously is a real healer for me. I mean, I love music, but I also, I'm actually about to, well, I'll get into that. I want to start meditating, but I do a yoga class every week that's over in Balboa Park. My friend Olivia teaches it, and she's absolutely amazing. And it's free, it's to anybody, it's by donation. People just gather at like 6 and Laurel and do yoga for an hour. But I really love that class, and every week, even though I pretty much love every day of my life, I really like, that's like a super cool, like kind of healing meditative thing. Although it's pretty active yoga, it's not like you're really sitting there for very long, it's more of a workout, but I always feel so spiritually centered. And she always talks at the beginning of it, kind of her experiences that week, or something that resonated with her. Like I remember one week a friend of hers had passed away, and she's just super honest, but it gives you kind of life coping skills, like this happens to all of us, so how do you, you know, how do you deal with it?
that you've like learned through music, or like the skills you've learned through other endeavors in life, how they like transpose to each other?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question or a great observation. Yeah, I find that as I got older, I didn't used to be able to kind of correlate things together the way, but especially like, you know, perseverance and doing things and breaking it down to little, like I'm fixing this old car, and you know, just being super patient and getting it right. And then I'm the same way with my bass playing. It's like I'm super repetitive when I'm practicing something, and I do something really slow, like over and over and over, and you know, that's kind of the only way to learn things. So it's kind of that being patient and with yourself and with whatever the challenge is at hand. So, you know, whether I'm like bike riding or working on the car, practicing, or in the garden, and you know, also learning from things, which I think is this, you know, patience, but learning from things. Like if you do it wrong, like anytime you're doing something new, it takes you like 10 times as long as it should, you know, and then eventually you just get more efficient, you know how to do it. So I think I just try to, even if I'm frustrated and pissed off, like I try to treat it like a learning, like how can I learn from this? Like do I need to do it differently, or do I just need to be more patient with myself? So yeah, that's a cool question.
I couldn't help but overhear the conversation of photography and developing film and that kind of thing. Like, can you just briefly tell us about the camera and your background with it?
Oh yeah. So this is just a little Olympus OM1 I got, a little manual camera, film camera. So when I was like, I think in 7th grade, and actually photography's been a really big part of my life, kind of off and on. I totally forgot about that. I have like a lot of black and white photos and stuff. In middle school, I think, I took a class from a guy named Stan Pector that I still know. Or I was just going into La Jolla High School, and it was about film and developing and printing and stuff. So I learned all that and set up a darkroom in my parents' basement, or not bathroom. And I really was into it, and I still am, although I've let it lapse sometimes. But pretty much most of my life, like, photography's been something I like. And it's interesting because I think a lot about like music, and once you play, unless you're recording it, it's just like gone, you know. And people have all these memories of it, but they're just mind memories. And then photography is kind of the exact opposite, where it's like you're grabbing this glimpse of this moment, you're capturing a moment, and then that moment's like frozen forever, which is kind of cool. I mean, they're so opposite in a way, yet they're both these artistic endeavors. But you know, because photography is also kind of a two-part process, where you're taking a picture but then theoretically really developing it. And you know, if you're doing digital like Photoshop or whatever you do with it, that's part of the creative process too. So almost like a composition and a performance kind of thing. And then there could be a recording as well, that's sort of a third aspect of music. Like how do you, what do you do post, you know, with post processing it and everything. So yeah, but I still dig film, and I just got kind of back into it, you know.
What do you think it has, this type of project, what do you think impact it has on artists? Once we finally show the episode, what do you think it means to them?
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, of course I'm honored to be involved in it, but I think it inspires other artists. I mean, we're all interested in what other artists are doing, and the whole world is always interested in the arts. So I think it's a really good way of, you know, that sense of community, bringing people together, educating people. Like, you know, here's how Charles McPherson thinks, here's how Rob Thorsen thinks, here's how Ed Kornhauser. I mean, I'm sure all our views are going to be like all over the map. I think of it more in a community sense, not just like Ed checking me out or me checking Charles out, but kind of everybody that sees it. And I almost think the insight the regular people, other people see, the insight they get will be kind of the coolest thing, because people want to know, especially with artists, like kind of what's going on in their mind and what's part of the creative process, you know, because people have interest in, and almost everybody's played an instrument at some point in their life, or you know, or taken pictures and everything. So I think it just opens up windows, and it opens up confidence for people. Like, you know, because I didn't even start playing bass till I was like 21, you know, or no, maybe I was like 19, I guess. But, you know, you can be like older and start doing it and still totally be like, have fun with it and maybe even get success, you know, financial or whatever kind of success you're looking for.
Where did you go to college?
I went for a year to SDSU, which was pretty much a wash. I was still a sax player, and I wasn't even accepted as a music major the first semester. And then I was, but they only offered classical saxophone, and it was really a downer. It was just like, I just wasn't feeling it at all, and I was just not ready for college at all. And so I just kind of bailed after that year and moved to San Francisco. And then later, when I was 29, I think, I went back to a school up in Los Angeles called Musicians Institute, and I went up there and I met a bunch of cool contacts there, like Bob Magnuson and Putter Smith and Joe DiOrio. All these great musicians were teaching there. And then I also went for another year to University of Miami. So that was when I was like 29 and 30. I just wanted to get more education. And
can you tell us about like how you absorbed San Francisco culture, or what you remember from it the most?
Yeah, I totally loved it. I mean, when I first went up there, I was still, that was when I was at the very end of my saxophone years. And so I think I was 18 or maybe 19. And I drove up, I had an aunt that lived there, and she said I could stay with her for a little while in the Sunset District. So I went up and played on the street playing saxophone and then I bought a bass, small electric bass at a garage sale and started playing bass, and I really got into that. And then I bought like a battery amp, and I found this band called the Powell Street Blues Band, and I told them I had a bass and I could play like some blues songs and stuff. I just had a basic knowledge of it. And I said I could, you know, play some blues bass, because they didn't have a bass player, and they were playing right at the Powell Street turnaround. There was this Japanese woman playing guitar, Yoko Aramichi. It was a cool band. So I said, yeah, I have a bass, and I'd love to play with you guys. And then I also mentioned that I had a van, because I had a VW bus, and they were like, oh, yeah. They got really into that because nobody had cars. And so I think that kind of got me in the band. Although they usually had to help me push start the bus, but still, I had a car. So, so I got in a band, and then that kind of led into some other things. But I was a bicycle messenger for a living up there, and so that also, a lot of musicians were bike messengers, because you could work for like 6 months or 3 or 4 months, and then stop for a while and come back. It wasn't a big deal because you were working on a commission basis. So it was a killer gig. It was a really fun bike messenger, but I also made a lot of contacts musically, and there was people like in kind of the theater arts, like these kind of avant-garde theaters, like south of Market that I used to play at. We'd have like 2 musicians and then 2 dancers, and I mean, it was pretty wild. Like I remember this one where the dancers were all naked, and it was like, and we're playing all this music, and it's just like, it was wild. It was pretty fun. Yeah. San Francisco, go figure.
What was your first bass? What model? What was it?
I barely I remember my second one better. I think it was like a copy of a Hofner, like it was a little guy, and it was $35, and I was just like, cool, I'll take it. And I had that for a while, and then I saved up, and I went to like it wasn't called a Guitar Center, but it was one of those places like that on Van Ness Street. And I had like $100, and it was like a Baldwin bass. That's kind of a copy of a larger hollow body bass. And so that was really the bass that I used for the next couple years. And then a neighbor of mine, I was living on Oak Street at 404 Oak Street, right down almost by City Hall, and he was this like funky fusion guy and had this really old Precision. And I didn't know much about it at the time. And I was always like, man, you play great bass. And he'd be all like this. And he said, man, I'm about to get an alembic bass. And I'm like $300 short on getting an alembic bass. And I said, well, if you ever want to sell that Fender, I'll buy it. And then he goes, we might work something out. And he came back like a couple days later, and he said, yeah, I can get this alembic. Give me, I think it was $350 or something. So I bought it, and I still have it. It's like 1961 Fender Precision. So I still use it too. And so that was how I got my electric bass. And then I ran into some people that were playing upright, and one guy lent me an upright, and then I started doing the upright thing. Once I got into upright, I was like, man, I dig this instrument so much, and then I focused more on that.
Who are the players that really, you know, made you want to gravitate towards upright?
Upright. There was this guy named James Leary who just passed away literally like a week ago in LA, and I think he lived up in the Bay Area, and I used to hear him play, and he really inspired me. And trying to think, the early albums I listened to, there was some Pharoah Sanders albums with Cecil McBee, and that really did it for me. I liked Cecil a lot. I always liked Charlie Hayden, and probably the guy that really set me off was Charles Mingus. I really like, and I still to this day worship Charles Mingus, and also Oscar Pettiford, you know, for the early guys, and that was back in that time period. You know, now I have a different set of, you know, there's obviously more modern guys that I enjoy, but still they're like the serious, like, great players. Yeah.
What about Charles Mingus that you really like?
Just his everything, his attack. I want to say his aggression, but his aggression was like a serious, like, aggression in a bad way also. But he was so, like, such a strong force in his command of the instrument, and also his compositional skills and his sort of buoyancy to the music. You know, you felt like, even though it was like some studio recording, you hear him yelling and people groaning, and, you know, there's like, it just seems so real. You know, I really like it, because I always search out, like, emotion to me supersedes like technical virtuosity, although all those guys had technical virtuosity as well. But I really like the emotional impact.
That's so funny. When I think of Charles Mingus, I don't think of Rob Thorsen.
Oh yeah, we're pretty far on the spectrum there, the yin and yang of bass players. But yeah, just I don't know, his whole approach and musicality and just everything I really love. Yeah, you know, I think it just varies a lot. To me, Charles Mingus was his personality as a person and his personality as a musician and a composer was totally dialed in. Like, the music's kind of cacophonous and rambunctious and rowdy and celebratory all at the same time, and it seems like that's what he was like as a person as well. And I don't know, I think generally artists tend to reflect their personality. I was trying to think, like, you know, Charles McPherson is somebody I super look up to and respect him just probably almost more than anybody, like any living musician. And, you know, he is such a gentle soul. I mean, when you hear him play, you know, sometimes he's like hitting it so hard and serious bebop, but then his compositions, his originals have this amazing, like, gentleness and super kind of spirituality to him, and his playing does too. So he's, you know, he can really kind of stretch the parameters and everything, but he's incredibly, I mean, he's so knowledgeable, and not just knowledgeable like spouting off knowledge, but so interested in what you guys are doing, or, you know, what everybody's doing as an individual and in the world and everything. So I really respect him a lot for that.
Yeah, it really.
Yeah, it really screams.
You know, you have so many albums and you've played on so many other people's albums as well. Is
Yeah.
there one that you feel like encompasses your body of work that you're the most proud of?
I did one called Lasting Impression that actually has that song that you were looking at, Cigarones, on it. I like that one a lot. That one came out really good. And I actually liked my very first one. The recording was pretty raw. I mean, it was professionally done, but we were just all in a room with some mics. But it still like holds up. But each one seems to have its merits. Sometimes I kind of forget about an album and then I'll go back and listen to some tracks and I'm like, wow, that, you know, it holds up. There's nothing I'm like ashamed of, you know.
What was it about Lasting Impression that you know, was it the experience? Was it the final product?
I mean, I put a lot of effort into it, both arranging and stuff, and I hired like a good engineer to come down from LA so the instruments sound really crispy and good. And I had Jeffrey Keyser on half of it, and Josh Nelson, and Ben Wendell's playing sax and bassoon on it. So it was like, and Duncan Moore, so it had a real all-star, you know, not all-star, but like pretty heavy hitter people, but also people that I really liked and were friends, and you know, especially like Josh Nelson and I are still like I really respect and love him so much. So, you know, it was just people that I felt, I mean, you always want to be recording with people you feel a camaraderie with, but you know, a lot of people will go into a studio, like say you're a singer and you're just like, man, I want to get the best band I can, so you hire like, you know, these top LA guys and stuff and go in and do an album, but they might not be as behind your project, they don't know you and stuff. So I think you always want to have that kind of respect, mutual respect and support, I think, when you record. And I feel like pretty much all my albums I've managed to have that.
What do you look for in gathering a team like that?
I mean, I think about their sounds. You know, one thing I think a lot about is Miles Davis, and how he put groups together that really the musicians they weren't opposite. Obviously they were, especially the rhythm section was super locked in, but you know, you take like John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley and Miles together, and they're three, just, you couldn't find three more different musicians, you know, as far as obviously all at the absolute top of their game, but they were so diverse in their approach, you know, where Cannonball had like such a strong blues based, you know, alto chops kind of thing, and Coltrane had a completely more modern like sheets of sound, and you know, or whatever they, you know, he was really moving forward, and Miles had that, at least during the kind of blue period and stuff, that quintet, Miles had such a simple melodic approach a lot of times. So I look to sort of a diversity in style. I think that can really complement, instead of having like maybe a whole band of people that specialize in bebop, or like, oh, these are all the guys that worship Wayne Shorter and Freddie Hubbard or something, or a certain sound, but maybe a little more diversity so it makes people think outside their box.
What did they teach you during that session?
You know, just being around people at that level, especially like Ben, well, in an overall sense, I would say like humility, you know, I mean, and you know, like Ben Wendell didn't really know me. I just hired him because Gilbert recommended him, and I listened to him a bunch, and I loved his playing so much. And I knew Jeffrey and Josh pretty well, but I remember mostly their support, and you know, we're here to make the music happen, and nobody is like, oh, the clock's running or anything. It's, you know, everybody was super supportive, which you need that in the studio.
How do you pronounce this? Is it Cigarones?
Oh yeah, Cigarones, yeah.
What does that mean?
Oh, they're little, it's like little cigars, but they're those little, cicadas are their real name. So they're the little bugs that, they're not really around here, but they're in a lot of parts of the world. They're all over Asia, and I was in Costa Rica, and they're doing their thing, which doesn't happen all the time, but it's like, the cicadas they're everywhere. They're all over the trees. You don't really see them very much. I'm sure they're there, but it'll be dead silence, and then you hear this kind of chirping roar thing, and then it just goes crescendos into this huge thing, and then comes back down, and each thing's maybe like 30 seconds or a minute, and it goes on like 24 hours a day, at least when it's in season. It might be part of their breeding season or something, I don't know. But I was in Costa Rica and this was going on. I was like, oh my God, I got to write a tune about this. And so that, especially that opening section, that's all, you can see how it's these dynamic swells and all that stuff. And I even took like my bow and I added some effects with the bass in it to kind of like, because there's other sounds going on at the same time to kind of replicate that.
What made you want to write a song about it?
That's pretty fun. Oh, I thought it was just it just reminded me of like a symphony when they warm up, you know, and they're just all playing like different things, but it's just kind of this, like it gets kind of loud and then it gets quiet. And I just thought it was so cool the way they were synchronized in their crescendos. And I'm sure it was like, I mean, it must have gone on for miles and miles, or maybe hundreds of miles, but they just respond when they hear the other animals.
How much of your own original compositions are inspired by your experiences or nature or photography?
Yeah, I would say quite a lot. The Costa Rica thing was really good for me because I didn't have a bass, or maybe I had an electric bass. No, I don't think I did have an electric bass, but I was like, I wanted to be productive. I'm always into being productive. I don't like just like not doing anything. And so I wrote that song and another one while I was down there. And I had to kind of fine tune them when I got up here because I didn't have a piano down there. But I try to take advantage of, and also the rhythm of what was going on rhythmically in that song. I try to take advantage of different environments if it inspires us. You know, it's the same thing with like photography or whatever. Your environment can really inspire you. So I try to make the most of that because I am sort of a worker bee. I really like to be producing and making things happen. Where I came up with those chords, because I came up with them in Costa Rica, so I must have just been kind of dicking around on bass, and then I remember I wrote in some bass lines and stuff even over the rubato part. And the chord changes, at that time I was starting to play a lot more piano, so I was probably, when I got back, I probably dialed that in a little bit more. I find it helps, I mean, when you want people to play your music, if you don't put that, I mean, sometimes like a sharp 11's in the melody, so the piano player knows to do it, but other times it's not, and if you want that sound, like one note can really change the character of a song, and I think it's important that you write it as closely as you can. I mean, it's cool to just put D7 and hope they interpret it right, but I think giving people a little more like harmonic substance kind of helps. And going back to Charles McPherson, I always, like, one of the things I love about being on stage or at a rehearsal with him is his rapport with the pianist. The pianist is such, his ears are so amazing. I mean, any little nuance that the piano player does, it might just be how he's voicing the same notes or something, and Charles just like recognizes everything so fast. It's just like, it's amazing. Yeah, so I tend to be not over the top. Like there was a guy, incredible pianist, Rick Helzer, who used to teach at SDSU, and every chord was like written out like 8-note voicings, like exactly what it was. And I always felt like for the solos or something, maybe that's like the horn, who's ever soloing might want a little more harmonic freedom than that. So sometimes when I write solo changes, I simplify them a little bit, but I think if people are just listening, then it's all good. But that's just to kind of give people a framework.
Where do you start when you compose? I'm a horn player, so I usually hear melodies, or I hear like a structure of 16 bars first. How do you compose?
You know, I don't have any rhyme or reason. I go through different periods. Sometimes it's just like a little bass groove, or one time I was walking back from Panama 66 at the end of the night, and I just sang this melody, and I liked it, and I recorded it on my iPhone, and I actually, between Panama 66 and my car, which was like 4 minutes, I came up with this whole song, and I tweaked it a little bit when I got home, but that was like just kind of really different from how I usually do it. And other times I'll be at the piano, like, and it's a much slower process, you know.
What do you start with? Do you start with the bass line? Do you start with the melody?
Not always,
yeah.
You know. I would say more often I'll start with a bass line or like a groove and then add the melody. I don't think I'd start with the melody as often, and maybe I should, but I mean, I play melodies on bass, but it's not what I do 90% of the time. So I tend to think of like bass lines and like, or rhythmic hits. And I think a lot about like rhythmic patterns and rhythmic hits and how that sets things up. But that tune has almost no melody because it's really like that bass line at letter B, I think it is, that doom, 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 doom. That's actually kind of the main, I wouldn't say it's the main melody because that's a melody at letter A too. But yeah, that tune was kind of a different whole vibe.
We're doing projects on a variety of artists, including Jonathan Glazer. What impact did he have on your life?
Yeah, absolutely. He had a huge impact. When I was 6 or 7, I started playing baritone ukulele, and Jonathan Glazer was my first teacher. He taught at La Jolla Music, and my mom would take me down there every week, and I'd get a lesson with John, and he taught me some simple classical guitar and also some folk. I remember some song called Lemon Tree, some different like simple little folk songs, probably some easy Beatles songs, but he was really the reason. My mom was super supportive, but she wasn't like that. She played classical guitar and I think also took some lessons with John, but I felt like he was really the reason I kept going with my music. And I had no idea of all his talents as far as the microtonal instruments that he created and that whole side of him, you know, which was, it turned out, I mean, that was huge, you know, what he did. He has that Sonic Arts Gallery, and which used to be more of a music space, and now it's really more of a jewelry and crystals and clothes and stuff. It's a great store. But I've talked to him and just, you know, basically said what I just did, how, you know, if it hadn't been for him, I probably wouldn't have kept going on music. I mean, it definitely inspired me. And he was just, you know, this kind of long hair, he's like he is now. I mean, he was like this kind of long hair hippie guy, you know, just like, I really looked up to him. I thought it was the coolest thing because my mom wouldn't let me grow my hair long, and I was like, oh man, I want to be like John Glazer when I grow up, you know, have long hair and play guitar and everything.
What have your students taught you?
I should also mention that I teach through Arts for Learning, the Jazz and American Art Form project. So that's still, although everything's kind of been on hold for COVID, but so yeah, my students teach me stuff all the time. You know, there's no better way to learn your craft than to have to teach it, right? And I think if for people that don't teach, I mean, artists or musicians, I think there's a lot that you can gain as a teacher. It just, for one, it really keeps you humble because some of your students are so talented, but also you really have to think your things out and know how to express yourself clearly. Just like on an instrument, you can kind of BS your way through a solo if you don't know the chord changes, but it's not like really understanding the song. And it's kind of the same way. If you can't express an idea to a student, and the funny thing is, every student's different. You know, what I might be able to say to this student that he's like, oh yeah, I get that, totally doesn't work with this student. So you have to find these different approaches, and we've all got, you know, everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses. So you have to be constantly recreating like how you teach. You know, it's not like one format that works. And I don't do like classroom teaching so much. I'll do like clinics and stuff like that. And certainly when I do my Jazz and American Art Form, there's groups of like 300 students there sometimes, or between 80 and up to 500 or 600 actually. And you're teaching them, but that's a little more formatted. There's some back and forth, but I think it's the individual or small group teaching that really brings out the best in you, and it's the most challenging.
In retrospect, what have you learned from quarantine and COVID, and just how have you adjusted your behavior?
Man, I've learned a lot. It's actually been a sort of a positive experience for me. Well, for one, Steph and I got to spend a lot of time together, which at least at first during the quarantine was cool. But I learned a lot of like Zoom skills, teaching online, recording myself, recording tracks. I never knew how to do that before, so I learned, how to pop in a bass part to a song. So it was really good for me, and I kept really motivated. I did my weekly jazz concert. I call it Jazz with Rob, and we perform right here in the patio, like for an hour on Sundays. And I'd hire. First, I was just doing solo artists, I was just doing me as a solo artist, and which got to be really challenging to come up with like 10 new songs every week. So then I started bringing in different duo partners, and so I did all these different duos, and I did some trios. And in a few weeks, I'm going to be doing some like 7 or 8 piece things here. So I learned a lot from it, and I never felt like bored or unmotivated, and I think that was because I set those deadlines for me, which that's kind of like psychology 101. If you want to stay motivated, you set a deadline for yourself. And so that's what I did, and it seemed to have really worked. I was looking back through, like, I had the stack of maybe 120 songs I did with different artists, and at least half of them were new to me, and at least over half of those I still remember like by heart. So I learned a lot and got exposed to not just like what I like doing, but like if I brought Ed Kornhauser in or Laurie Bell or Joshua White, they'd bring in some of their tunes, and I'd get the tunes early in the week and be shedding that. So it really made me work towards a goal. So things I've learned that from the whole COVID experience that'll be with me hopefully forever. Well, like I mentioned, the ability to record myself, those technical kind of things I learned, do Zoom lessons, classes, share screens and stuff. But I think also the importance of staying motivated and setting goals for myself. Usually my goals are sort of imposed. Like Victor Baker will say, okay, we're doing this gig Saturday, here's 8 tunes, learn those. But this was more like, okay, I want to create something. What can I create that's involves the community? We're still COVID like careful, I can't have 8 musicians here, and it was really cool because I got to interact with musicians that I don't always get to interact. I had a mandolin player, Chris Cherny, come down and play, and it was super cool. I mean, it was totally like a different thing. So there was like this, okay, you've got to adapt to this and figure out how to make it work. So it was really valuable. It was a great experience. So I hope to carry that further and, always sort of embrace like diversiveness in my musical thing. I did one with Charlie Chavez, a conga player, with just bass and drums, and it really made me grow, and so I want to continue on that path.
Do just really quick talk about Steph and just...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like she's the most incredible wife and person you could have. We couldn't be happier. It's what's the last 5 years have morphed into this incredible thing with when she and Nina Deering founded Voices of Our City Choir. And it's been such an incredible experience seeing this happen. And I've always been involved and in the band and supportive. I'm more like Steph's supporter in that role. Just there's so much to deal with because it's turned into a really large-scale nonprofit. But I never would have dreamed like 5 or 6 years ago that this would be such a part of my life.